This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. I love this title. Everyday Chaos, Technology, Complexity, and How We're Thriving in a New World of Possibility. This is it, right? Just love that title, Everyday Chaos. Don't you just love everyday chaos? I do. I mean, sometimes I want to take a break, but ultimately it's more fun when we don't know what the hell is going to happen. My guest today is David Weinberger, and that is his new book. David is a technologist, and he brings a certain perspective. I think you're going to enjoy this journey through David's world and ultimately through everyday chaos. Without further delay, let's jump right into the conversation with David Weinberger. David, as I'm thinking about chatting with you today, I'm thinking about all the complexity. And there's a particular example, and I don't want to go down the political side of this at all, and you can quickly pivot to another example. But if I look at America right now with its debates, its political debates about election interference and all these issues, it's so complex. And it's not the example that I want to go today by any stretch of the imagination, because then that just becomes political. But I think it's useful for the complexity angle. And people just can't wrap their arms around, from what I can see, when they're dealing with any complex issue in the modern life right now with all of this technology. People are really struggling on good decision making. They're struggling with how to even analyze what's going on. And in turn, I don't know. It really seems like people are at their wits' end in some way. They don't know what to do. But you've really looked at these issues of complexity.
I agree with you. Start with that. But in some ways, you could argue that the political troubles that we're going through now in one sense, have a simplifying effect because the lines are so clearly drawn. I mean, there used to be more harder to classify where you were. Now it seems pretty straightforward. It's gotten pretty binary. But just as you say, this occurs in a time in which the complexity that's always been in our political lives and all of our lives is now apparent to everybody. You can't avoid it. This, I think, starts with the internet, where even though people say, and with some truth, that there are now echo chambers and people only talk to people with whom they agree, that was always the case to a large extent. When I grew up, I'm 68, so when I grew up, our family got its newspaper thrown on the porch every day, and you were tribal by your newspaper. The newspapers had different political slants. It seemed like it was much simpler in the age of the internet, which we are obviously fully in now. You are aware of how detailed everything is, that you could drive down if you wanted to. If you're interested in a topic, you could drive down into the smallest, tiniest details, and literally endlessly. You could spend your life on any tiny question that you wanted, which is a revelation, I think, of how things always were. It was masked from us because the relative crudity of the media, that is, very few outlets, very short newspapers, came once a day, all that sort of simplicity, that masked the deep, endless complexity of our lives, which has always been there.
David, as I was thinking about this conversation today, I was thinking about my world. In my world, before I started doing this interesting podcast, writing about these traders who have taken all of this data out there and reduced it to something simple, the price action. And in turn, they can use a momentum strategy and follow along. And that works really, really well to take all of the complexity of the fundamental data out there and reduce it to something simple. And I think that will continue to work very, very well because prediction is hard. But, in your world, while you will agree that prediction is very hard and complexity is always out there, when you start to think about machine learning and you start to think about all that data, reduction is not where you want to go necessarily, is it?
We've been very successful, just as you say, in managing our lives and predicting the future through reduction. It's been the oldest technique that we humans have had because since we started having brains, our brains were inadequate to understanding the universe the way that we would like. It's a very, very big universe. We have evolved over thousands of years these reductive techniques by which we come up with generalizations, laws, principles in every field, and we apply them, and they work really well enough to make us the dominant species on the planet. But we now have a technology for the first time that embraces complexity, that does not require the sort of simplification that we used to do, which is the machine learning type of AI. The way that machine learning works, roughly, is, let me contrast it with typical computer programming. If you wanted to write a program to predict, say, quarterly sales, somebody would figure out what the factors are, the handful of factors, the sort of thing you put on a spreadsheet that affect quarterly sales, and what their relationships are. That's a model, right? You have an idea of how quarterly sales work. So we do the same thing, by the way, for the weather, where around 1900, a guy for the first time said, oh, you know what? There are 7 factors that affect the weather. We put these together, we look at what they are, and we can predict. And initially, the predictions were really, really, really terrible, but we added more factors and the like. So one way of doing the weather has been to simplify it to those factors. With machine learning, you don't do that. You do not begin by giving the computer your idea of what the factors are and how they go together, what their relationship is. You just pour in data. And this is a really radical idea, right? This goes against about everything we've thought about how to understand the world. If it's a piece of AI, machine learning, called Deep Patient, that was created in New York by a hospital, they took 700,000 patient records, the data in them, about 500 data points in each, and poured it into a machine learning system. The important thing is what they did not do. So they did not tell the computer that these are symptoms, and this data, these are drugs, and this data, these are outcomes, and the rest of it, the sort of stuff that we know about medicine. They poured the data in, and they let the machine pour through it, connecting every dot it possibly could. And each dot is connected to many, many other dots. There are all these possible relationships. They all have different weights or probabilities, let's say, for their interactions. And you end up with this gigantic, unimaginably large map of connections among data points that enable you to make predictions about oncoming diseases. And in some cases with greater accuracy than doctors can, and in some cases for diseases we simply cannot predict. We achieve this by not telling the system what we think the model is of how disease and bodies work. We didn't give it that simplification. The result was a model that is so much more complex that frequently we humans simply cannot understand how it's coming up with its answers. That's new. And that paints a different picture of how the world works, how the future happens, and our human role in it.
It changes everything to start to think that way. Let's take a simple example for music or even something like a film. I mean, what happens instead of the creative individuals sitting down and saying, I will write the next great script? I mean, are we going to be at a point in the not too distant future where the AI, the machine learning, can take some basic notions, some basic ideas, and through its kind of own internal A/B testing, et cetera, and actually produce something better than us humans?
In some cases, I think it's arguably already happening. So there's AI-composed music that, at least to my ears, and I am not a music critic, I wouldn't be able to tell. It's just that simple. But there are other areas where, for example, joke writing. So you would think that joke writing, it's pretty formulaic, and it should be something you can do with AI. But so far, AI has produced some funny stuff, but generally it's funny because you know it's AI and you see how bad it is. You laugh at the stupid machine that kind of understands, in quotes also, air quotes, sort of understands what makes something funny, but really doesn't. And so it comes up with these dumb, robotic, and sometimes very hilarious results. And I think humor is actually a really good case because a good joke is very sophisticated in its presentation to us of a context, some human context, and pointing something out about that context that we hadn't thought about, that it doesn't just state, it sort of leads us to it and lets us complete it. That's a really sensitive context-based thing, humor. Right now, AI is not writing jokes that are actually funny, not just funny because they're so wrong. It may be. It's certainly plausible that at some point AI will be able to write jokes that we will laugh at and the late night comedians will tell, and they will have to say, and this came from the Robotron 2700 or whatever. Then we'll have a different set of issues, which is the extent to which it matters to us that things were created by humans. And I suspect that it will matter a great deal to us.
Let me take a big picture for a second as we jump into some examples. Let me take people back in step a little bit to some of the big picture that you're laying out in your work, Everyday Chaos. These are some wrong ways that people are looking at things. First, we think things happen according to laws. Number two, we can understand how things happen. Number three, we can make things happen by pulling the right lever. Number four, change is proportional to effect. Now, generally, we've always thought that these big picture ideas, that this is how it works. But as technology is increasing, as complexity is increasing, we're finding out that these old ways, and let's start with laws, for example, that these laws exist that you must follow, it's just not accurate anymore. We're evolving. Everything is evolving to something new.
Laws are complex because it seems certainly the case to me that Newton's laws and the vast amounts of scientific laws and relationships that we've discovered, they're real. I certainly don't want to be a Newton denier. I really like science. The law of gravity holds until scientific evidence suggests otherwise. So right now, the law of gravity is a pretty good one. I mean, Newton's laws are good. The issue is that Newton knew this, by the way, since everything that has mass has gravity affecting everything else in the universe. The simple law can be very simple, but its application can require vast simplification. You have to, for practical reasons, you ignore the gravitational effects of all the distant stars when you calculate the landing speed for an aircraft or whatever, because it doesn't affect it. The laws are there, but the complexity to which these laws apply is so overwhelming that we have to simplify the data. And then we simplify our understanding to have this falsely sort of easy mechanical view of how the world works. In real life, scientific laws absolutely hold and are useful and a tremendous achievement for the species. And at the same time, you cannot predict as you walk down the street whether a car is going to splash you with mud, whether the person walking next to you is going to jostle you, or what color socks your coworkers are going to wear. We live in a world in which everything, just about everything, is unpredictable in daily life. But we don't see that. We don't pay attention to it because we carry around with us a model of the world that says it's law-like activity. Well, sure, but that doesn't mean that it's simple or predictable. The world remains, even a law-like world, remains incredibly complex. And then the number of places where law holds is also, I think, more limited than we like to think. So I've been talking about physics, but there are huge and important parts of our lives which are way, way less law-like.
Let's start with the word, because this is the word that's in your title. And it's a word that I would hazard a guess that the vast majority of people don't think about on a daily basis. They surely don't want to imagine their life and the world that surrounds them like this. But chaos is it. We are in chaos. Now, if someone hears me say that, they're going to think, oh my God, this guy's like, this is the end of the end times or something like that, or it's really negative. But now this all depends on perspective. If every day is chaos, and we know that to be true, if we accept that, then there are ways that we can manage that. There's ways that we can deal with that. But it's very difficult for people to accept that word chaos, isn't it?
Yes, and for good reason. As chaos is properly really scary because you don't know what's going to happen, and it feels like you are out of control. But I think the 20 years of the internet has actually gotten us much more used to the chaos in which we live, enabled us to see the chaos that's always there, and to evolve new strategies and techniques for dealing with it, with dealing with this reality. Because on the internet, you largely see an unfiltered set of people and ideas and data and bad ideas and connected in such a vast network that we couldn't possibly ever see it or even come up with laws that somehow clarify all of these connections. It is a chaotic environment, but it's also incredibly creative, and it's one in which information overload is the fact of life. That is the truth. There is more information than humans could ever possibly process. We've gotten used to that idea on the internet, and I think that's a type of maturity that we can face that. Our brains cannot handle all of information.
Let me push back for a second. Have we really figured out this chaos? We know it's happening to us. I posed the example earlier, but if I look at the current situation, and this is by no means am I trying to go in a particular direction, but if we just look at the current, America's fascination with the politics and the Russian interference in the election and stuff, it's overwhelming for most people. People don't know what to really do with it. They hear all this information. Are you supposed to be scared? Are you supposed to not be scared? I know, yes, there's two sides and that can be binary, but the overall idea is so big and so massive. And to me, that does seem like that's a direct expansion of so many voices with being connected. We're all connected now. So it's really an issue of back in the day, if the Washington Post had a headline, in the early 1980s, we could trust that. We can believe that. Now, if the Washington Post has a headline, well, there's a headline about the headline. There's 10 different views about the headline. There's 10 different views about the headline coming from one side, from the other side. It just goes on and on and on in terms of data. And I just wonder if people really are able to wrap their arms and their mind around all that chaos.
I do not want to minimize the downsides of the internet when it comes to exactly that sort of question. But I do want to point to some other sides without minimizing all of those risks and dangers and people going wrong and falling into, echo chambers and the like. All that's real and being manipulated by large platforms, among others. All that's true. And yet people still are on the internet. And despite the unease, generally they're there because they're succeeding at what they want to do, which ranges from passing time to finding out more about something. So this is a chaos that I think it is properly disturbing. I think you're exactly right. People are, in fact, disturbed, bothered by this sort of chaotic rush of information. But we know what the alternative was because we lived under it for many, many, many years, which is a handful of media outlets and a handful of authorities. And I'll say, those authorities in the West, they tended to be white men of a certain income level and education. That's just the way that it was. So we had this nice, comfortable stream that we felt like we could master. You listen to the 23 minutes of news every day, and it was well crafted. But everybody was basically watching the same source, and all of those voices and all of that chaos and all of that disagreement and all of those details and all of the topics that the news wasn't interested in, but maybe you would have been, all of that was hidden from us. And now suddenly it's been exposed. And we've been living in that world for 20 years. On one hand, we fail at it all the time. On the other hand, we succeed at it all the time. But overall, it has gotten us used to the idea that this is, in fact, life. It is not the 23-minute broadcast once a day of the news. It is this onrush of differing opinions and endless information about anything we care about. And it's a huge challenge to live in this world, but it is the world. It is the truth.
Let's talk about something that is really interesting that I've probably wrapped my arms around in the last decade from, frankly, as an author, as somebody that participates online, trying to get messages across to people. I don't think the average person realizes that when they see a headline, for whatever it is, maybe they're just searching on Google for a particular topic or just whatever it is. It could be media giving them a headline, something that catches their eye. That bit of information that catches their eye is often a test. It's not just Bob sitting down and drawing up a headline for the search that you're searching for, or the media that you're consuming. It's a test. It's an A/B test. And I want you to define A/B for the audience, but it's a test where there are great pieces of computing power that are seeing what captures our attention better, because those machines can't predict either. But since they've got so much computational power, they've got so much time, so much energy, they can keep throwing the messages at us to find out which one allows us to respond better.
A/B testing, I think, is a great example of a couple of things. And one of them is new tactics or strategies for succeeding without having to rely upon simplification to test, which everybody has encountered without knowing it. Go on a site and there's some ad, and you respond or you don't. Well, the person who is running that ad very likely is doing an A/B test or more variations in which, say, the first 100,000 people will see the ad on the left-hand side of the page, and the next 100,000 will see it on the right-hand side. It clicks, and then you say, oh, right-hand side works, or different color background, or different headlines. In fact, the New York Times has at least experimented with A/B testing headlines to see which ones get more clicks. The advertiser goes with one choice, but doesn't know why A or B got more clicks, and that's fine with the advertiser because they're getting those clicks. As of now, there are no general principles that are emerging that say whenever it's an ad about barbecues, then put it on the right and put it on a green background. If it's an ad about a microwave, then put it on the left with a blue background. We are not even attempting to come up with these generalizations because it's much easier just to run the A/B test again for any product. The A/B test can have very surprising, counterintuitive results. The Obama campaign in 2008 found that the full color picture of their family on the candidate's homepage did not draw nearly as many clicks as a black and white version. And who would have predicted that? But it doesn't mean that therefore the site should switch to all black and white. It can be extremely context sensitive. It could be that because it's a family photo. It could be because when it was tested, it was cloudy over and who knows what effect any of this has. But you don't have to know. You can just run the test again and again. Used in a very chaotic, unpredictable, without any inclination towards coming up with a general understanding of why it works. And we are 100% fine with that. Nobody is bothered by that. It works. So we don't bother trying to generalize. This is a technique for using the complexity all around us.
The people that are in the know, the people that are delivering content get this. But I don't think the average person necessarily understands that all the content that's flowing at them is a test. I don't think they necessarily know that they're part of the experiment.
They definitely don't. I mean, they may have read about A/B testing, but the test doesn't tell them that they're part of an experiment. That would invalidate the test. In the same way, in the old days of where you get envelopes and the physical mail, they would run similar sorts of tests and say, oh, it turns out that a green envelope works better, so let's use the green envelope. So this is not entirely new. It's just being done in more areas at a greater scale. I don't mean A/B testing. I mean these sorts of techniques that do not rely upon generalizations, that do not rely upon prediction, rely upon anticipating people's actions, and that in order to succeed with your effort. And that change, especially that last one, where many different techniques used on the internet, companies consciously hold back from anticipating what the results will be as a technique for success. And that, I think, overall is a very new and very different way of understanding how the future works.
I love that, the unanticipation, because that gets back to, as I mentioned, with the root of the investment books that I've been involved in, their strategies were often about the unanticipation. Like, we don't know what's going to happen. And not only do we not know what's going to happen, another word that really starts to fall into this whole direction that you've gone is surprise. We can't account for surprise. We don't know when it's going to happen, but there are ways to somewhat be prepared for surprise and react accordingly.
That's right. And I think there are at least two techniques in everyday chaos. My book talks primarily about the second one. The first is to recognize that, you're going to be surprised. A black swan, as they say, is going to fall on your head someday and destroy your business or knock your business for a loop, and nobody can know what it's going to be. That needs to be part of your strategic planning, and I think that's absolutely right, and a lot of companies are doing that now. I think there's also something else going on that is an even bigger change in how we think. This is pretty pre-internet. This is 1908 when Henry Ford launches the Model T. Over the course of the next 19 years, he sells 15 million of them. Huge, huge success, with making basically no changes that are visible to the customer. Tiny little tweaks. And he did this because this is a classic model case of somebody designing a product by anticipating what the user is going to want. The user is going to be riding on muddy roads because, horse paths mainly, so better make the thing ride high. The user has probably never driven a car before, so the user interface better be really simple and so forth. And Ford totally nailed it, 100%. Nowadays, it's very common for a company to launch what's called a minimum viable product. in which you pare your product offering down to the fewest features, the core key features. So if your Dropbox, it's, people should be able to work on their documents, their files, wherever they are. And that's the sole feature, basically, that it launched with. You sell, this is not a beta, you sell people this product, and you watch to see what it is that they want. You do not try to anticipate. You hold back because you recognize you don't know, and you recognize even users won't know until the product is in their hands and they see what they need. You observe and you measure and you find out what they want, and then you start building that into your product. This is a hugely successful way of going. Lots and lots of companies do this very successfully. It is the opposite of the Henry Ford approach. Ford was a genius who nailed the anticipate and build. On the internet, it's far more common, and I think it makes far more sense to hold back from anticipation. Anticipating and preparing has been our way of dealing with the future since we started carving arrowheads. This is a Paleolithic strategy. Now, suddenly, in the past 20 years, we're seeing an easy, casual reversal of this, where people say, in multiple ways, it'd be way better if we didn't anticipate. Let's not anticipate. This, I think, changes our idea about how the future works and how you deal with the future. The way that we've done it for thousands of years until very recently was we thought about the future as being this big open field that we're moving through, and off in the distance are all the possibilities. As you come closer to those possibilities, they begin to narrow. Fewer until there's just one left, and that's the present. And so your job is to anticipate that future and to try to make sure that one possibility that you want is the one that becomes real. When you engage in this new strategy of unanticipation, and minimum viable products are just one example of this, you are doing the opposite. You're reversing the flow of the future, so to speak. It's not narrowing. You're going to release stuff that enables you to make more and more possibilities. And that turns out to be a really successful strategy.
So here's the thing. I'm looking at your work and I'm thinking to myself, and maybe I'm a fanboy, maybe I'm biased, I don't know. But I look at your work and I'm like, okay, I'm in line with David 100%. I don't know where I would disagree. This is so painfully obvious to me where I am in my life, what I've seen, my business, everything. Just, I'm there, okay? But then I think to myself, we've got this school system where 18-year-olds go off to college and they spend 4 years there. This system and what people learn at the universities, it seems like, yes, this is happening with AI, the machine learning, etc. But in terms of like training people to truly understand the path that you've gone down, it sure seems like that the system of education is perhaps as bad as Henry Ford's Model T system. Look, the Model T system was great for when it happened, but evolution keeps unfolding. The next thing you know, we're at 2019 and you and I are having this conversation about everyday chaos. And I'm just wondering, where's the chaos thinking when it comes to educating the vast majority of young people?
What a hard question.
I'm good today, huh?
Oh, yeah. Can we just leave it where you said, I'm 100% with you? I like that part.
If we sat down, you and I right now, we sat down with the vast majority of intellects, academics, scientists, business achievers, et cetera, the heads of the Silicon Valley firms, I seriously doubt that anyone of that group is going to go, oh yeah, David's completely off his rocker. I think they're all going to go, yeah, this is pretty obvious to us right now. But it's not so obvious to the masses. And I sure as heck think that the educational system is probably not helping young people to understand the directions you've gone as much as it should.
My aim in the book is for the reader to look at things that she already knows about and say, oh, you're right, that is really different. I agree with you. This is a challenge for the book, for sure. My hope is that by pointing to things in our ordinary lives and showing how they, in fact, embody this difference in how we think about how the world works and how the future happens, that the reader will also come along. Education is a really big, difficult issue, in part because it's a big institution. It seems to me that there is this generational switch going on. And I don't think anybody has worked out the degree to which we need to make sure that students have mastered a body of shared information and knowledge, because I don't want to give up entirely on that and say, everybody go off and do your own thing. And yet at the same time, the extent to which they are open to difference and disagreement. I think the way forward on this is not going to be all that helpful. I just want to warn you. But I think that the way forward on this is to do what I think we are already beginning to do, which is to think about knowledge less about what the content of somebody's head or what she's written down in a book, encapsulating it, much as I like books, but to think about knowledge as a property not of an individual, but of a network, a sub-network within the big network. So as we are talking, there is a great deal of confusion and debate about the current political situation. I don't want to talk about my opinions on that, which are obviously perfectly correct. But if you look at this sort of ferment, where's the knowledge in it? You can ask, okay, well, is this person, this commentator, is she the one who has the knowledge? And I don't think that's exactly what we do. I think what we're doing now is we are finding networks, open-ended networks, then arguing amongst ourselves. And that's where the knowledge is. There's no single person who has the knowledge about the political situation or political question. It's in that person's connection to other people, to other people, to other people, their disagreements, their agreements, their amplifications, their tweaking, their explanations, their questions. That's what constitutes a good, healthy network of knowledge. It's the people who are disagreeing and helping each other understand, sometimes by distinctly disagreeing. What we are seeing in the upcoming generation, the younger generation, is at least an implicit recognition that the world is too big for them, any one individual, to understand. This is something we can only do together. There's no possibility of our doing it in such a way that everybody agrees with everybody else. It has to be a network of disagreement and difference, and hopefully civil. But that's what we're building now.
You said a second ago, it's kind of not each of us doing our own thing. It's more of the network thinking. But as I think about your subtitle here, technology, complexity, and how we're thriving in a new world of possibility. I love a title like that because I think to myself, well, yes, I can't know everything. I can't predict a damn thing, really, but there's so much possibility. And what that reduces to for me is, what should the goal be for people in general? So, for example, I brought up the educational system. People go to 4 years of school still, I think, with the goal of saying, well, when I finish my 4 years, I'll have the start of my CV and I can apply for a job. I'm completely opposite to that. And I have been for 30 years. I look at it and say, what are the possibilities? What can happen? I don't know what's going to happen. And I'm not pursuing the job. I'm pursuing the freedom. And I think that's, to me, what you're really outlining, is that if people kind of can accept this everyday chaos and they can accept going with the current, if they can accept that there's going to be surprises and they're robust and they're flexible and they're adaptable, the opportunity for a great life, the opportunity for individual freedom is tremendous.
I don't talk about freedom in the book, but I really like that way of thinking about it. So thank you very much for that, Michael. I think you're exactly right that the old idea of a career has fading away, and painfully, I have to say, because there's security in the idea of a career, has been fading away for a generation now, and it is, I think, in full bloom. I think people are, in some ways, are reconceiving of themselves as sort of like open, connected. We used to talk about a career path, and it doesn't feel like a path anymore to many people, to most people. It's instead thinking about their large social networks, their career social networks. They see those continuing throughout all of their lives, as they should, because they'll always be. It used to be when you left the job and relocated, you lost touch with everybody, and now you don't. They're there as a possibility. That sort of environment is a type of freedom. It's also scary because freedom is terrifying. It can be very, very frightening. I have for a long time thought about our careers as sort of a story that you're able to tell. It's a path and a story. But our ideas is also changing. The easiest example by far, I think, is Game of Thrones. No spoilers. But one of the things about Game of Thrones, first of all, it's how many, 100 hours? I have no idea what it is, but it's a big, long story. I mean, it's bigger than a Dickens story. I mean, our capacity to handle narrative and our interest in handling complex narratives has increased dramatically just in the past 20 years. Has something to do with it, getting us used to this sort of complexity. But we also expect our stories to be much more surprising than they ever were. The lead character doesn't necessarily end happily. It may not even turn out to be about the lead character. We've gotten used to the idea that stories are not simple. That's not what we want from our narratives anymore. We see this in art and culture. I think we're seeing it in our own ideas about our own lives. I think that's healthy because that is, in fact, how it has always worked.
I look at where you've gone, and it just strikes me that I think this is life. This is reality. I'm really curious the percentage of people that really get this, the people that really accept this. I happen to be visiting some family and friends in the DC area right now. I haven't seen them for about a year. And when I listen to their stories and I listen to what they're doing, they seem completely oblivious to these ideals that we were talking about today. They're locked in their tunnel vision of what they do. And to me, it looks like the same thing they've always done. I just think a lot of people are going to be surprised, and people are surprised at different times, but I think a lot of people are going to be surprised when they have that realization of what you're saying is true. Because you lose a sense of power. You can't control it. You don't know what's going to happen. Now, I love that, but I don't know if most people love that.
But we shouldn't. There is something very liberating about it, but it is scary. It has also always literally been the truth that we do not have power, or at least full power, over our lives or our death. Most of our culture, the time in our culture, it was assumed that we do not have a lot of power over what happens. That's just been our story. And to a large extent, that's true. We got very uncomfortable with that idea over the past, let's say, 300 years. But that's unusual. The sense that we have power, we ought to have power, that we can understand the world and apply it, all of that is relatively new. The idea of the book is that our success in these chaotic environments, the internet and increasingly the picture that machine learning gives us, our success in those areas is enabling us to accept the chaos that success is premised on. So certainly a large part of the planet's population don't have the privilege of participating in this part of life and culture the way that most of us do, us being listeners of your podcast. But those of us who do have come and who enjoy the internet and use it for more than just looking up the morning weather or whatever informational task. Those of us who enjoy being on the internet enjoy it because, I'm going to say, I think largely because it is always surprising. It is always chaotic. It makes clear just how endless the amount of information is, and also how connected that information is to each piece, because that is the architecture, that is the literal architecture of the internet and the web, information that is linked without a plan, without a map, without a central organizer, just you, me, and everybody who's ever created a link on the internet. We like that environment. We're there because we get something out of it, but we also learn from it implicitly that we can do okay, we can thrive in an environment that we don't control, that is beyond our control.
That's exciting. It's exciting that we don't have control. To me, it's the possibility in not having control. But on the flip side, I do look at the many people across the planet. What are we at, 7.5 billion? A lot of folks are not, as you say, privileged to yet see the world through that lens. They're still dealing with basic issues and whatnot. My family was dealing with basic issues a few generations ago, too. That's just the nature of life. We all keep extending and evolving in families and friends and social circles, etc. The lack of control can either be scary or exciting.
And both, for sure. One of the ways I think of thinking about the single biggest change I think we are undergoing in the West, in our culture for thousands of years, we've had in various forms the assumption that humans are special because we are the ones who are able to understand the universe, understand it some way. Maybe it's because God made us in his image, obviously not physically, but in terms of our ability to understand things, and gave us this special position that we would be able to understand, as far as mortal beings can, how his creation works and the glory of it. Starting from the ancient Hebrews, the ancient Greeks, all the way through, we've had this basic assumption that we're special because our thinking somehow is capable, uniquely in the universe, capable of understanding at least the basic principles of how the world works. We're still finite creatures. The experience of the internet and our success, both in business and personally, our enjoyment of the internet have gotten us used to the idea that, well, wait, this is way more overwhelming and chaotic than we ever thought. And then the model of how the world works that machine learning uses and successfully uses, those are teaching us, especially the model of machine learning teaches us that the way that we think the world works is not the sort of model that machine learning uses, and machine learning is better at predicting things about the world than we are in many instances.
That prediction is that it's better at is just because of the sheer scale that it can keep probing and experimenting, whereas we as humans don't have that ability to keep experimenting and probing, and the use of data at such a vast scale. That's why the AI machine learning is better.
That's half of it. It's a really important half of it. And that by itself would be enough. But it also does not try to reduce that scale down to generalizations, which is the way that we have proceeded. It doesn't need to, because it can handle that scale. I mean, that's really the driver here. But it doesn't need to say, oh, okay, so there's a universal law that says always put the barbecue recipe advertisement on the right, or whatever. It's happy to leave itself with millions of particulars connected in billions of connections, and to use the math behind that to make a prediction. It's such a different way of thinking that I think that it starts to erode the core belief, the core assumption, the basic sort of contract we have with the universe, which is we are the creatures who are able to one degree or another to understand it. And I think we are now moving beyond that core agreement, that contract we've had.
Let me follow up there as you say that AI making the prediction. Whereas most people might think, for example, going back in time, maybe Warren Buffett internally made a prediction about Gillette and Coke and thought, my gosh, this investment's going to work great for me for 3 decades or 4 decades or something. AI is making a prediction not necessarily to look ahead for decades. AI is making the prediction, could be in a very short-term basis, and then constantly reassessing that prediction, which makes it difficult to use that word prediction, because AI reassessing itself on a near constant basis to make predictions is different than how we might think of prediction typically as just humans, how we've all grown up understanding the word.
I think it is, and we know that we use AI to make predictions because it's more accurate. Where it's not, we don't.
Those predictions the AI is making, my point being, those predictions could be very short term, and then it reassesses and makes another prediction. So it's not like when AI makes a prediction on day one, AI is not saying, oh, I know this is going to happen for 10 years. It's making a prediction based on all the evidence that it has today, but that could change tomorrow.
The timescale depends a lot upon the use case. So in case of stocks, which are so volatile, absolutely, the predictions should change whenever there's new data coming in. In the case of weather, it's less volatile. We can now predict many days out. In the case of climate, science and AI are capable of making long-term predictions. But it is certainly the case that these predictions, especially the shorter-term ones, are very volatile. And the fact that these systems can learn and feed back in is also quite remarkable.
But AI never has to stop reassessing with the computational power. It might make an XYZ prediction on climate going forward for decades, but it's constantly reassessing. Perhaps 1 year into its 20-year projection, it might get a whole new round of data and then make some other projection.
Yeah, that's entirely possible. That's what you want. But it's not simply that it is dealing with these particulars and can reassess. That's hugely important. The fact that AI can make reassessments in some areas is absolutely vital. Very fast-moving, very particular, delicate situations like a stock market. I think that the big difference is that in the old days, we would reassess, say in a weather report, daily weather report, we might have a set of laws that enable us to figure out what the weather is going to be, having to do with pressure of air and its temperature and so forth. You reassess based upon the data that you're feeding into it. You have new data about a new cold front, and that changes your weather prediction. With AI, the model can always readjust itself, depending on how you set it up, but it doesn't have an allegiance to some broad set of principles. From one prediction today to another tomorrow, no matter how it's readjusted, it may simply be the case that we humans cannot understand how the system came up with its predictions. That inexplicability of at least some AI systems tells us something that I think is very unusual and disquieting to us, but also I think liberating, which is that this fundamental contract that we thought we had with the universe, which now that we have machines that can handle so much data, that contract doesn't always hold, and that we think we are in the universe.
Well, hey, that gets to the bigger picture issue, and it's a good ending point for us, which is, how do we know that this is not all a simulation? Who knows? Some other advanced civilization somewhere out there, Twilight Zone-esque, created a sim city, and we're all just a part of it. Who knows? We might find out one day, huh?
Of course, it's one of those things that almost by definition cannot be determined. I mean, Are you dreaming? Are you part of my dream? Michael, I think I'm the one who's dreaming here. So it's set up so that you can't understand, which means it doesn't really matter. But it seems to me just to be a fever dream of technologists who have mistaken information for what information is a measure of. But if you do wake up and I'm in your dream, just drop me a note so I know.
David, the book, Everyday Chaos, Technology, Complexity, and How We're Thriving in a New World of Possibility. I hope we can stay in contact in the years to come, because I really love the direction you're going in. Like I said, I was not familiar with your work, but maybe I'm just a fanboy or I'm biased or whatnot, but I really feel like you are right there at the pulse of where we are in our understanding. And I think this is the right direction. And I personally love the word chaos.
Your questions are fantastic. You're pushing me into things I hadn't thought about. Anytime you want to talk, that would be great.
Hey, where can we send people? Is there a website, David?
everydaychaosbook.com.
Cool. Hey, very good stuff. Best of luck with the book. When I see a cover and I see that you've got Seth Godin paying attention, one of my favorites, I think you're already on the right path.
I couldn't agree with you more.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.